In the far reaches of the galaxy, humanity had long been the underdog. The vast universe was home to countless advanced civilizations, races that had mastered technology, space travel, and combat in ways that made humanity seem like children in comparison. Among the greatest spectacles in the galaxy was the Galactic Race, a high-stakes event that took place only once every 10 years. Pilots from across the galaxy gathered to race through the most dangerous parts of space: treacherous nebulae, asteroid fields, and hostile alien territories. The race was not just about speed, it was about survival. Only the finest pilots from the most powerful star systems had ever taken the top spots. Humans, with their limited resources and technology, were nothing more than a joke. Jonah Clark, an average human pilot, had always dreamed of racing in the Galactic Race, but not even he could have imagined being part of it. A former military pilot, Jonah was a decent pilot, but far from exceptional. Yet he had one thing most pilots didn't: a cocky sense of confidence and an inability to back down from a challenge. On a typical night at the infamous Starlight Tavern, where the galaxy's scum and glory all came to drink and talk, Jonah found himself caught in the buzz of conversation surrounding the race. His friends, who knew his reputation for being a little too bold after a few drinks, laughed as Jonah joked about joining the race. But this time, his words felt different. He was serious. "I'll bet you," Jonah said, leaning across the table, "I could enter the Galactic Race and finish in the top 10. His friends laughed so loudly it drew the attention of nearby tables. Humans had never even come close to that feat. It was unheard of. Jonah, though, just shrugged. "Top 10, easy." The laughter continued, but before anyone could say anything more, a figure at the bar, cloaked in dark robes, turned toward them. The stranger's piercing blue eyes glowed slightly. In the dim light, he was an alien, his species a mystery to most. "I overheard your wager," the alien said, his voice smooth, but with an edge of something dangerous. "You claim a human can finish in the top 10? Jonah, now intrigued and slightly buzzed, shrugged again. "Why not? I've got guts. That's all you need, right?" The alien studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll take you up on that bet." Jonah's heart skipped a beat. What was this alien getting at? The man continued. "Prove your worth, human. Enter the race and finish in the top 10, and I'll grant you something valuable. But fail, and I'll collect something of yours in return." Jonah's instincts told him to back out. Something about this stranger felt off, but the challenge, the excitement of the race, it called to him like nothing else. His friends, still, laughing and watching, egged him on. "Come on, Jonah. You won't back down now, will you?" "You'd better go for it." Jonah was no coward. He took a deep breath, raised his glass, and grinned. "All right, it's a bet," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. The alien didn't smile. He simply left the tavern with a cryptic warning. "We shall see, human." Jonah watched him go, his mind racing. He had no ship capable of entering the race, no sponsors, and certainly no friends who believed he could actually finish in the top 10. What had he gotten himself into? It didn't matter. Jonah was used to being underestimated. He had been his whole life. Maybe that was his greatest strength. He didn't need fancy technology. He didn't need special training. All he needed was a chance to prove that humans were more than just a joke. That night, as he stumbled back to his small apartment, Jonah's mind buzzed with thoughts of the race. The Galactic Race was 10 times more dangerous than anything he'd faced before. But something deep inside told him that if he could just make it into that race, he would show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. This was more than a bet. It was a chance to change everything. Jonah Clark was going to make history. The question was, could he survive long enough to do it? Jonah Clark had never expected to find himself in the position he was in. One moment, he was joking about entering the Galactic Race. The next, He was standing in a small, dusty hangar, staring up at the rusted remnants of an old starfighter. The ship was called Sparrow, and it looked like it had seen better days, or at least better centuries. It wasn't much, and that was being generous. The hull was scratched and dented. The engines sputtered like they were about to give out at any moment, and it lacked the advanced technology that every other competitor's ship boasted. Jonah had never thought about the reality of the race until now. The grand spectacle of the galactic race wasn't just about speed, it was about survival, and the Sparrow was no match for the sleek, custom-built ships that most pilots raced. These ships were state-of-the-art, equipped with cutting-edge technology, hyperdrives, shields, and weapons designed for combat and speed. Jonah's ship barely had working weapons, and the engine could hardly keep up with the other ships in terms of velocity. But there it was, his only option. As the countdown to the race grew shorter, Jonah's excitement began to falter. The reality of the challenge ahead settled heavily on his shoulders. He didn't just have to race against skilled pilots, he had to race against the galaxy's most dangerous individuals, the kind who had been training for this moment their entire lives. His main rival, Kalor, was a Ziran, a ruthless alien, with a reputation for sabotaging anyone in his way. Kalor's ship, Vortex, was an unbeatable machine of destruction. The Ziran was known for using every dirty trick in the book, from hacking competitors' ships to creating deadly obstacles on the course. Jonah knew that finishing in the top 10 would be impossible without some serious upgrades, but no one was going to hand him those. He was stuck with the Sparrow, and the ship's old-school tech seemed hopeless against the shiny new competitors. With only a few weeks before the race, Jonah was forced to make the best of his situation. He spent every waking hour trying to learn how to pilot the Sparrow effectively. The controls were old and clunky, the ship's systems barely functional, and there was no manual to guide him through it. It felt like he was flying a broken machine, and the only way to stay in the race was to master it. To make matters worse, the course itself was nothing like anything Jonah had ever faced. The galactic race was infamous for its deadly challenges: asteroid fields where gravity seemed to shift unpredictably, nebulae that clouded vision and distorted sensors, and hostile alien territories filled with traps. Only the best pilots survived, and no one had ever made it through without facing at least one life-threatening situation. Jonah knew the odds were stacked against him, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. He had to prove to everyone that humans weren't just a joke in the galactic community. With each passing day, Jonah grew more anxious. There was no time for fancy upgrades, no time for complicated repairs. He'd have to rely on his wit and his instincts, things that couldn't be bought or built. His experience in the Earth Defense Fleet had taught him how to stay cool under pressure, how to think on his feet when things went sideways. But this race wasn't just about thinking. On his feet, it was about surviving, and Jonah wasn't sure if his skills would be enough. He spent long nights in the cockpit of the Sparrow, learning how to handle the ship in ways the manuals never taught. Each test flight felt like a gamble, the ship's engines roaring in protest as Jonah pushed it to the limit. He knew that one wrong move could send him spiraling into a deadly asteroid field or worse, straight into the line of fire from Kalor's weapons. By the time the race finally began, Jonah felt more fear than excitement. He'd barely trained enough, and the Sparrow was still a wreck. But he was in it now, and backing out wasn't an option. The starting line was filled with sleek, powerful ships, their pilots sitting confidently inside. Jonah's ship, however, was an outlier, a relic from the past that most people thought wouldn't even make it out of the starting zone. As the countdown began, Jonah's hands gripped the controls tightly, and for the first time, he realized what he was up against. This wasn't just a race for glory, it was a race for survival. And as the lights flashed green and the engines roared to life, Jonah knew one thing for sure. He was about to face challenges that would test him in ways he could never have prepared for. Would the Sparrow hold together long enough for him, To make it through? Would his instincts and determination be enough to beat the galaxy's finest? Jonah didn't know, but one thing was certain. He was in this to win. And he wouldn't let anyone, not even Kalor, stand in his way. The galactic race had officially begun, and Jonah Clark found himself hurtling through the first leg of the course, the abyss, an uncharted and treacherous region of space. It was a place no pilot in their right mind would willingly enter. The Crow. Abyss was infamous for its unpredictable gravitational anomalies, areas where the fabric of space-time warped in ways that made navigation impossible for most ships. Black holes lay hidden in the darkness, and the very air was filled with strange forces that could tear apart anything unlucky enough to cross their path. But Jonah had no choice. This was the first obstacle, the gateway to the rest of the race, and there was no turning back. The Sparrow, his ancient, battered ship, shook violently as it entered the warped region. The controls felt heavier than usual, like the very weight of the galaxy was pushing against him. Jonah's fingers tightened around the cracked steering yoke, and he gritted his teeth. The ship wasn't fast, it wasn't sleek, and it sure wasn't built for this kind of race. But he had something the others didn't: instinct. His time in the Earth Defense Fleet had taught him to trust his gut, to read the space around him, in ways that went beyond technology. Jonah knew that while the other pilots relied on their fancy tech and automated systems, he had to rely on himself. As the other ships sped past him, their sleek engines roaring like beasts, Jonah could almost hear the mocking laughter in his ears. The Sparrow didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. The other pilots didn't even glance back at him. Some even sneered, thinking he was nothing more than an easy target. But Jonah wasn't just fighting for a spot in the race. He was fighting to prove something. As the first gravitational anomaly came into view, Jonah's eyes narrowed. The other pilots were already taking sharp turns to avoid the danger zones, but Jonah didn't follow their exact paths. He trusted his intuition, steering the Sparrow in a series of unexpected twists that seemed to defy logic. It was slow, it was clunky, but it worked. The ship shuddered as it barely dodged a massive asteroid, its surface glowing red from the gravitational pull of a nearby black hole. The ship's warning alarms screamed, but Jonah didn't let it distract him. He had to keep his focus. The Sparrow groaned in protest, but it held together, inching its way forward. And then, something strange happened. As Jonah passed through another dense patch of asteroid fields, he noticed that a few ships ahead of him were falling behind. Some had clipped asteroids, others were veering off course. They were losing control. It wasn't just about speed anymore. It was about skill, and Jonah's careful, calculated approach was paying off. Slowly but surely, he began to close the gap. The other pilots may have had better technology, but they didn't have his steady hand and quick thinking. Then Jonah saw him, Kalor, the ruthless Ziran, notorious for his dirty tactics. Kalor's ship, Vortex, was easily one of the fastest in the race. The Ziran's craft weaved effortlessly through the treacherous space, its engines purring as it cut through the abyss. But Jonah wasn't fooled. He saw Kalor's subtle movements, his ship swerving in ways that didn't make sense. It was clear. Kalor was deliberately setting traps, trying to force Jonah into a deadly collision with the surrounding obstacles. As Jonah entered a particularly narrow passageway, a cluster of asteroids began to move towards him, too fast to dodge. His heart skipped a beat. He knew this wasn't just the random chaos of the abyss. Kalor had triggered it, but Jonah wasn't going to be a pawn in someone else's game. With his pulse racing, Jonah slammed the Sparrow into a hard left, narrowly avoiding a massive rock. His ship groaned under the strain, but he held his ground. Kalor's ship, thinking Jonah was out of the race, shot ahead. But Jonah wasn't done yet. He had survived. And now he was determined to prove he belonged here. He fought through the trap, pushing the Sparrow forward with everything he had. By the time the first leg of the race was nearing its end, Jonah had somehow managed to pull himself up into the middle of the pack. He wasn't first, but he was no longer last either. The other pilots, who had once dismissed him as a joke, were now starting to take notice. They couldn't deny it anymore. Jonah Clark, the human with the outdated ship, was still in the eye. Race. His survival wasn't by luck, it was skill, and the other competitors were beginning to see that. But Jonah knew that the race was far from over. The abyss was only the first test. There were worse obstacles ahead, and he wasn't sure. He was ready for them. But one thing was clear. He wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. As the race continued through the unforgiving reaches of space, Jonah Clark found himself pushed to the limit. His ship, the Sparrow, was holding together, but barely. It had taken every ounce of his skill and determination to make it this far, and the gap between him and the leaders was still too wide. But just when things seemed hopeless, an unexpected encounter changed everything. Jonah was navigating a dense asteroid field, his eyes darting between the shifting rocks and the controls of the Sparrow. The Sparrow wasn't built for this kind of precision, but he had made it work by staying focused and using every trick in the book. That's when he noticed something strange. A ship, almost invisible against the dark backdrop of space, was tailing him at a distance. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't trying to pass him or show any signs of aggression. It was just watching. Jonah's instincts kicked in. The ship was too stealthy to be a competitor. It had to be someone else. As Jonah continued to maneuver, the mysterious ship suddenly pulled up alongside him, its sleek, dark hull barely reflecting the distant stars. Before he could make sense of what was happening, a communication channel buzzed to life. The voice that came through was smooth, almost unnervingly calm. "Impressive," the voice said. "Your survival instincts are remarkable." Jonah's grip tightened around the controls. "Who's this?" he demanded, trying to stay cool. The voice responded, cold but not threatening. "We are the Orvans. We've been watching you, human." Jonah's heart skipped a beat. The Orvans were known throughout the galaxy for their stealth capabilities, their near-mythical ability to remain undetected by even the most advanced technology. If the Orvans were paying attention to him, it meant something. "Why are you following me?" Jonah asked, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. "We believe your abilities could be of use to us," the voice replied. "Your ship is inferior, but your tactics have been effective. We could help you, Jonah Clark. Upgrade your ship with technology that would make you a formidable contender in this race. In exchange, we ask for your allegiance." Jonah's pulse quickened. The Orvans were not a race to be underestimated, and the offer they were making was tempting. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. If he agreed, Sparrow would become something new, something powerful. But there was a price. "Allegiance?" Jonah repeated, his mind racing. "What does that mean?" The Orvan voice was patient. "Once the race is over, we will call on you. There is a diplomatic mission of great importance, one that involves the future of your species. You will assist us in securing an alliance with your people." Jonah hesitated. He didn't know what kind of mission the Orvans had in mind, but it was clear they saw something in him. Something that went beyond the race. After a moment's pause, Jonah agreed, knowing the stakes of the race had escalated. He needed an edge if he was going to finish with any chance of survival and victory. The Orvan's ship released a series of small devices that attached themselves to the Sparrow. Jonah's eyes widened as the ship's systems flickered to life, in a way he had never seen before. The upgrades were immediate and staggering. His ship's engines roared to life with renewed power. Advanced targeting systems appeared on his display, and the hull seemed to harden, reinforced with materials he couldn't even begin to understand. The Sparrow was no longer just an outdated relic. It was now a force to be reckoned with. Jonah, marveled at the sudden transformation. With these new upgrades, he was no longer outclassed. The Orvans had given him the tools to fight, and for the first time since the race had begun, he felt like he had a real chance. However, as he tested the new systems and prepared to rejoin the race, a nagging feeling began to settle in the back of his mind. Something wasn't right. The Orvans had helped him, but why? Was it really about the race, or was there a deeper agenda at play? The thought gnawed at him. He had been too focused on surviving to question their motives, but now, with their technology inside his ship, he began to wonder if he had just made a dangerous deal. The Orvans had their own interests, and they were known for using people as pawns in their long-term schemes. Had Jonah unknowingly become a part of something far bigger than the race? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the race continuing, the other pilots charging ahead as he re-entered the fray. The Sparrow, now faster and more powerful than ever, surged forward with a force that nearly threw him back in his seat. But Jonah's mind wasn't fully on the race anymore. With the Orvans in his corner, he knew he was closer to victory than ever. But at what cost? The road ahead had just become more complicated, and Jonah wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers that lay ahead. The race had entered its most dangerous stretch yet, the stellar maelstrom, a vast region of space filled with violent electrical storms, swirling clouds of charged particles, and asteroid showers that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The storms were so powerful that even the most advanced ships had difficulty navigating through them, and many pilots were quickly taken out of the race. The Sparrow, despite its recent upgrades from the Orvans, was still a relic, a ship not built for this kind of brutal environment. But Jonah wasn't like the other pilots. He had learned to rely on his instincts, and now, with his ship's new capabilities, he had no choice but to combine everything he had learned to survive. As Jonah raced through the heart of the maelstrom, the chaos around him was overwhelming. Lightning-like electric currents danced across the clouds, striking anything in their path. Massive asteroid fragments zipped past him, narrowly missing the hull. The Sparrow groaned under the strain, but Jonah held steady, his eyes locked on the readouts. The alien tech had given him an edge, but it didn't change the fact that he was still in a race against death. Each move he made had to be calculated, every maneuver precise. The storms made it impossible to rely on traditional sensors, so Jonah had to trust his gut, feeling the flow of space around him, anticipating every twist and turn in the violent, shifting currents. The other pilots were falling behind or getting taken out by the hazards. The Sparrow had already made it farther than most, but Jonah knew that staying in the race wasn't just about surviving the storms. It was about outsmarting the competition. That's when he saw it. Kalor, the Ziran pilot, had fallen into line behind him. Jonah's heart skipped a beat. The Vortex, Kalor's sleek, deadly ship, was closing in fast. Jonah had been expecting this. He knew that Kalor had a personal vendetta against him, and now it seemed the Ziran was ready to settle it once and for all. Jonah's eyes narrowed as Kalor's ship darted forward, using the storm's cover to mask his movements. Kalor had a nasty trick up his sleeve. He planned to ambush Jonah by hiding in the thickest part of the storm, where Jonah wouldn't be able to see him until it was too late. The vortex slipped in and out of the electrical clouds, like a predator stalking its prey. Jonah's fingers tightened on the controls. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The first attack came without warning. A blast of plasma fire shot out from Kalor's ship, narrowly missing the Sparrow's tail. Jonah slammed the controls to the side, sending the ship into a sharp dive just as another blast sailed past. He was in the thick of the storm now, the lightning and asteroids creating a deadly maze of hazards. Jonah had to think fast. His ship's shielding was holding up for now, but Kalor's relentless assault was starting to take its toll. The Sparrow's systems flickered, and Jonah's heart raced. He couldn't let Kalor take him down. Not like this. He needed to make his move. Jonah pulled the Sparrow into a tight loop, diving straight into a swirling vortex of electrical currents. Kalor predictably followed. The storm's energy cracked and roared around them as the two ships maneuvered through the chaos. Jonah could hear his heart pounding in his ears as the storm's wild energy bounced off his shields. But Kalor was too focused on his vendetta, and that's when Jonah made his move. In a daring maneuver, Jonah cut the engines to almost zero, allowing Kalor's ship to pass just in front of him. With seconds to spare, Jonah fired the Sparrow's remaining weapons, sending a well-aimed shot into Kalor's path. The blast struck the Ziran's ship just as it entered a dense cloud of charged particles, causing a massive explosion of sparks. Kalor's ship veered off course, narrowly avoiding a collision with an asteroid. Jonah didn't waste time. He pushed the Sparrow forward, his ship surging through the storm at breakneck speed. The Sparrow wasn't built for speed, but Jonah's instincts and quick thinking had given him an advantage. The storm was still furious, but it was no longer his biggest threat. Kalor was no longer a problem. Jonah had outsmarted him, and now he was racing ahead, leaving the chaos of the maelstrom behind. As Jonah approached the end of the stellar maelstrom, the few remaining pilots were far behind, their ships battered and broken by the storms. Jonah pushed the Sparrow to its limits, and as he finally emerged from the maelstrom's grasp, the crowd erupted in a roar. He had done it. Not only had he survived, but he had emerged in the top 3. The human pilot, once dismissed as a joke, was now a serious contender. The other pilots were no longer laughing. Jonah Clark had proven that even in the heart of the storm, he was a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would no longer underestimate him. The race had just become a battle for the ages, and Jonah wasn't about to back down. The final stretch of the galactic race had arrived, and with it came the most grueling, mind-bending challenge of them all, the Ring of Eternity. This ancient course, built by the mysterious Keltaran race, was a deadly labyrinth of shifting walls, cryptic puzzles, and dangerous traps. No one knew exactly why the Keltarans had created such an obstacle, and no one had ever fully understood how to navigate it. Now, it was Jonah Clark's turn to face it. His hands were sore, his body aching from the relentless journey. But he had come this far. He wasn't about to back down. The Ring of Eternity was more than just a race course. It was a test of the mind and spirit. As Jonah's ship, the Sparrow, entered the ring, the path ahead seemed to shift, as though the very walls of space were bending. The track was a maze of twisting corridors, massive gears that shifted like the teeth of a clock, and gravity wells that threatened to tear the ship apart. Jonah had to think quickly, making sharp turns to avoid being crushed by the moving walls or sucked into the gravity wells. His mind raced, trying to decipher the hidden patterns of the course, but it wasn't enough to simply stay alive. The race wasn't about survival now, it was about winning. Jonah's rivals weren't making it any easier. The remaining pilots, each a fierce competitor in their own right, were battling through the same challenges. The Ziran, Kalor, had been eliminated earlier, but there were still threats ahead, including the ruthless Thalor pilot, Jarok, who had been steadily climbing the ranks. Jarok's ship was sleek, built for precision, and he had no intention of letting a human take the crown. Jonah could feel the pressure building. This wasn't just a race against time. It was a race against the impossible. The first challenge came without warning. The track split into multiple paths, each one obscured by a wall of shimmering energy. A holographic message flickered on Jonah's display. "Solve the puzzle, proceed." The words were cryptic, but Jonah knew one thing. He had to figure it out or risk losing his lead. He studied the paths, analyzing the subtle patterns in the energy fields. It was then that he saw it. The energy barriers were connected to the massive rings that surrounded the course. With quick calculations, Jonah realized that by aligning the rings in the right configuration, the barriers would deactivate, allowing him to continue. But the puzzle wasn't easy. The rings had to be moved in a precise order, and the slightest mistake could send Jonah crashing into the walls or worse, disqualifying him altogether. With a deep breath, Jonah began to manipulate the ship's controls, using the advanced Orvan technology to interface with the puzzle. His hands were shaking, but his mind was sharp, focusing on the patterns he had noticed earlier. The rings began to shift one by one, but just as he thought he had it, the energy barrier flickered and reset. He swore under his breath. He had to be faster, smarter. The seconds were ticking away. Sweat dripped down his face as he tried again, adjusting his approach and applying just the right amount of pressure to the controls. This time, the rings clicked into place and the energy barriers dissipated, opening the path ahead. Jonah's heart raced as the course continued to challenge him, throwing puzzle after puzzle in his way. The next obstacle was a massive chasm, its bottom too far to see. A series of floating platforms stretched across it, but they were unstable. Each platform had a different weight limit, and one wrong move would send him plummeting into the void. The challenge was clear. He had to choose the right platforms based on the weight of his ship to reach the other side. Jonah's mind worked quickly as he scanned the platforms, noticing small markings on their edges. The markings indicated their weight tolerance. He moved with caution, carefully navigating from one platform to the next, making sure not to miscalculate. The sparrow groaned under the pressure, but Jonah's focus never wavered. He wasn't just racing. He was outthinking the course itself. As Jonah neared the end of the Ring of Eternity, exhaustion weighed heavily on him. His body was battered, and his concentration was beginning to slip, but he couldn't stop now. He could hear the hum of Jirok's ship behind him, growing louder with every passing second. The final test awaited, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to bend space itself. Jonah had no choice but to trust his instincts. The course was designed to break even the strongest pilots, but Jonah wasn't going to let that happen. He slammed the sparrow forward, weaving through the vortex, bending the ship's momentum just enough to avoid being pulled into the heart of the storm. At the last moment, he activated the ship's final systems, breaking every rule in the book as he hacked into the course's ancient structures. The walls of the course, once designed to constrain, now bent to his will. With a final burst of speed, Jonah shot through the vortex and across the finish line. For a moment, everything was still. The crowd's cheers echoed in his mind as Jonah slumped back in his seat, completely drained. He had done it. Against all odds, against an ancient and impossible course, Jonah Clark had emerged victorious. The race was over, but for Jonah, this was just the beginning. His name would be remembered not just for his victory, but for how he had changed the galaxy's perception of humanity forever. The moment Jonah Clark crossed the finish line, everything seemed to pause. The roar of the crowd echoed across the galaxy, a deafening wave of disbelief and triumph that shook the very core of the galactic community. For a moment, Jonah couldn't believe it himself. He had done it. He had won the galactic race, shattering every expectation. The Sparrow, his aging, beaten-up starfighter, had crossed the finish line first, far ahead of the sleek, advanced ships of his competitors. Jonah had done it with nothing but a dilapidated ship, some ancient tech, and sheer human grit. It wasn't just a victory. It was a statement, a declaration that humanity, often dismissed as weak and primitive, could stand toe-to-toe with the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The moment was surreal, but it didn't last. Just as Jonah allowed himself a brief moment of relief, the Orvans, the enigmatic alien race that had helped him, made their move. The truth came crashing down like a cold slap. The Orvans had never been his true allies. Their motives had never been about helping a human win. No, they had been using Jonah to advance their own agenda. Their plan had always been to exploit the human race, using Jonah's victory as a stepping stone to manipulate the galaxy's perception of humanity. The Orvans, it turned out, had been testing Jonah all along, seeing if a human could be molded into a pawn they could control. Jonah's heart sank as the truth hit him. The galaxy had just witnessed the rise of a human legend, but now the fight for humanity's future was about to begin. He was faced with a difficult decision. Would he fall into the Orvans' scheme, or would he expose them for what they truly were? Jonah wasn't the type to back down. He had faced impossible odds to win the race, and he wasn't about to let this one slide either. He knew he had something the Orvans couldn't control: the ability to inspire others. With his victory, he had already captured the hearts and minds of countless races across the galaxy. He wasn't just a human pilot anymore. He was a symbol. Jonah, resourceful as ever, began to work behind the scenes. He used his newfound fame and influence to rally other races against the Orvans. His message spread quickly: a call for unity, independence, and the preservation of free will across the galaxy. The Orvans, once thought to be the masterminds behind the race, were now exposed as manipulative and deceptive. Their plans began to unravel as races joined forces, taking a stand against the alien race's growing influence. Jonah became the face of this movement, not just as a winner of a race, but as a leader who had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the freedom of the entire galaxy. Humanity, once considered a joke in the eyes of the galactic elites, was now a force to be reckoned with. Jonah Clark had proven that even with the odds stacked against them, humans had the power to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast their enemies. The Orvans had underestimated the spirit of mankind, and Jonah's victory was the spark that ignited a fire of independence and resilience throughout the galaxy. His name, once a whisper of mockery, became a rallying cry for millions. Jonah Clark had gone from the laughingstock of the galaxy to the very symbol of its potential. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Jonah's victory continued to ripple throughout the galaxy. The other races, who had once looked down on humanity, now viewed them with a new respect. No longer were humans just a footnote in galactic history. They had proven their worth. Jonah's legacy grew with each passing day, not just as the pilot who had defied the odds, but as the man who had shaped the future. His name was etched in the stars, a reminder that sometimes the underdog had the power to change the course of history. In the years to come, the story of Jonah Clark would be told across planets, in taverns, in schools, and in the halls of power. It would be remembered as the moment when a human, with nothing but determination and creativity, took on the galaxy's most impossible race and won. But beyond the race, Jonah's legacy would stand for something more profound: the idea that no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, a single individual could stand up against the odds, challenge the established order, and change the universe. Jonah Clark's victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It was the birth of humanity's legacy in the galaxy.